The rain hammered down, failing to wash away the hypocrisy at my husband's funeral. As his business partner offered fake condolences, a drenched young woman broke through security and collapsed at my feet. She was not seeking an inheritance. Instead, she looked up with terrified eyes and whispered a secret that froze my blood. My husband had not died of natural causes. He was murdered, and she was the pawn used to kill him. My name is Alara Vance. I am 34 years old, and as an architect, I have spent my entire adult life studying how structures bear weight. I know how to calculate load and stress, how to distribute tension so that a building does not collapse. But as I stood beside the mahogany casket of my husband, Arthur Vance, I realized that no amount of steel or reinforced concrete could support the crushing weight of the solitude I felt that morning. The rain in Seattle does not wash things clean. It simply makes the grime slicker, and on the day of the funeral, the entire world felt coated in a layer of expensive, cold grease. The ceremony was a masterpiece of hollow luxury. It was exactly the kind of event Arthur would have hated. The cemetery was filled with faces I recognized from the financial news, men and women in bespoke black suits who had come not to mourn the CEO of Novatech, but to speculate on the future of their portfolios. Through the veil of rain, I could hear snippets of their hushed conversations. They were not talking about Arthur's laugh or his kindness. They were whispering about a 12% drop in stock value and wondering who would take the helm. To them, the man in the box was not a husband. He was a depreciated asset. Derek Sterling stood at my right hand, as he had for the past 10 years of our lives. As the vice president of the company and Arthur's college roommate, he was playing the role of the grieving brother to perfection. He held an umbrella over my head, shielding me from the downpour, but his protection felt suffocating. I watched him out of the corner of my eye. For a man devastated by the loss of his best friend, he seemed remarkably concerned with the time. I saw him check his platinum watch 3 times in the span of 15 minutes. He leaned in close, his breath warm against my freezing ear. I expected words of comfort. Instead, I got business. "Ilara," he whispered, his voice smooth and practiced. "We need to handle the power of attorney immediately after the service. The investors are skittish. We need to show stability. Arthur would want you to rest, not worry about the company. Just sign the papers, and I will take care of everything." It was a masterful manipulation, designed to make me feel small and incapable, to relegate me to the role of the grieving widow who needed a strong man to take the reins. I might have nodded, might have agreed simply to make the noise stop, had the crowd not suddenly parted like the Red Sea. A splash of violent crimson cut through the sea of black. A young woman was running toward the gravesite, stumbling in high heels, wearing a bright red dress that screamed for attention. The gasp from the crowd was audible. This was a scandal in motion. I felt Derek stiffen beside me. His grip on the umbrella handle tightened until his knuckles turned white. "Get her out of here," Derek hissed to the head of security, his voice losing its polished veneer. 2 large guards moved to intercept her, grabbing her by the arms. She did not fight them. She just looked at me. In her eyes, I did not see the arrogance of a mistress coming to claim her share. I saw terror. It was a raw, primal fear that I had only ever seen in the eyes of animals trapped in a corner. As an architect, I trust my instincts about structural integrity, and looking at this woman, I knew the official story of my husband's death was about to collapse. "Let her through," I said. My voice was not loud, but it was sharp enough to cut through the rain. "Ilara, don't," Derek warned, stepping in front of me. "She is just a gold digger. Do not dignify this with stand down." "Derek," I commanded, stepping around him. The guards released her. The woman, Isabella, collapsed into the mud at my feet. She was soaking wet, shivering violently, her makeup streaming down her face. She did not look at the crowd. She looked only at me. "I am sorry," she sobbed, her hands shaking as she reached into her purse. "I am so sorry." She pulled out a silver USB drive. It was dripping with rainwater. She held it out to me like an offering, or perhaps a weapon. Derek moved with a speed I did not know he possessed. He lunged for the drive. "Give that to me," he snarled, abandoning all pretense of grief. "I will not let you tarnish Arthur's memory with your lies." He was fast, but I was closer. I snatched the cold metal drive from Isabella's hand and shoved it deep into the pocket of my wool coat. I looked up at Derek. For a split second, the mask of the grieving best friend was gone. In its place was a flash of pure, unadulterated rage. It was the look of a man who realized he had lost control of the narrative. The rain continued to fall, but for the first time that day, the cold I felt did not come from the weather. It came from the realization that the man standing next to me was a stranger. I slipped away from the suffocating scent of lilies and expensive scotch that filled my home, telling the staff I needed to lie down. Instead, I drove my sedan out the service entrance, leaving the mourners and their hollow sympathies behind. 40 minutes later, I sat in a cracked vinyl booth at a diner on the edge of the city, a place where the coffee tasted like battery acid and nobody cared about the stock market. Isabella was waiting for me. Without the red dress and the rain, she looked terrifyingly young, perhaps 22 or 23. She kept her hands wrapped around a mug, her eyes darting to the door every time the bell chimed. She did not waste time with pleasantries. She leaned across the sticky table and told me the truth, and every word chipped away at the reality I thought I knew. She was never Arthur's mistress. She was a weapon. Derek had hired her 3 months ago, paying her $10,000 up front to stage a seduction, document it, and give him the leverage to force Arthur to resign. My hand tightened around my coffee cup. I asked her why she was telling me this now. "Because he was good," she whispered, her voice trembling. Arthur had not fallen for the trap. When she tried to corner him in his office late one night, he did not touch her. He sat her down, made her tea, and asked her why she was doing this. When she broke down and told him about her debt, he wrote her a personal check for $20,000 and told her to go back to school. He never touched me. Ilara. He told me he loved his wife too much to ever disrespect her, even if she never found out. Tears pricked my eyes, hot and sharp. My husband was not just faithful. He was a saint who had walked into a lion's den and tried to feed the lion. But the relief was short-lived, replaced immediately by a cold dread as Isabella continued. She told me that the blackmail was Plan A. When that failed, Derek moved to Plan B. She asked if I remembered the health supplements Arthur started taking 6 months ago, the exclusive executive vitality blend that Derek sent over as a monthly gift. I felt the blood drain from my face. I remembered them perfectly. Arthur used to joke that they tasted like chalk, but he took them religiously because Derek insisted they would help with his stamina. He was poisoning him, Isabella said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. It was not a heart attack. It was cumulative toxicity. The past 6 months flashed before my eyes, recontextualized in horror. I remembered Arthur's uncharacteristic fatigue, the way his hands would tremor over his drafting table, the gray pallor of his skin that I had blamed on the merger stress. I remembered the nights he woke up clutching his chest, gasping for air. And I remembered Dr. Thorne, the concierge doctor Derek had personally recommended, dismissing every symptom with a casual wave of his hand, prescribing sedatives and telling Arthur to sleep more. They were not treating him. They were managing his deterioration. I pulled the USB drive from my pocket and plugged it into my laptop. The audio file was time-stamped 2 weeks ago. I put on my headphones and pressed play. Derek's voice filled my ears, but it was not the smooth baritone I had heard at the funeral. It was a jagged, angry growl. "He is too stubborn to die and too moral to quit." Derek's voice snarled through the static. "We cannot wait for the election. The merger happens in 10 days. If he is not gone by then, we lose everything. Increase the dosage. Make it look like cardiac arrest." I ripped the headphones off, my breath coming in short. Panicked gasps. The man who had stood beside me at the grave, who had held my hand and promised to protect Arthur's legacy, was the one who had stopped his heart. I had invited a viper into my bed, trusted him with my life, while he slowly murdered the only person I ever loved. Isabella reached out and touched my cold hand. "You need to be careful," she said. "Derek is tearing your house apart right now, metaphorically speaking. He is looking for a file. Arthur figured it out at the end. He hid a heavily encrypted folder somewhere, and Derek thinks it contains proof of the embezzlement scheme that started all of this. If he finds that file, he destroys the evidence. If he finds out you are next." I looked out the window at the gray afternoon. The grief was still there, heavy and crushing, but something else was rising beneath it. It was a cold, structural rigidity. I was done being the grieving widow. Arthur had left me a blueprint for survival, and I was going to build a cage for Derek Sterling. I drove back to the estate, the tires crunching on the gravel driveway sounding like accusations in the silence of the night. The house, a sprawling modernist structure of glass and steel that Arthur and I had built together, no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a crime scene. Every shadow looked suspicious, and every dark corner seemed to harbor a threat. I walked through the foyer, my heels clicking on the cold marble, and I did not see my home. I saw a puzzle box. Arthur was not just a CEO. He was a man obsessed with classical cryptography and hidden spaces. If he knew he was dying, and if he knew Derek was coming for him, he would not have left the evidence out in the open for anyone to find. He would have integrated it into the very bones of the house. I closed my eyes and visualized the blueprints. We had argued over the library layout 3 years ago. I wanted an open flow to the garden, but he had insisted on thick, reinforced walls. He had won that argument. I was tracing the wall with my mind, calculating depths and voids. When the doorbell rang, it was midnight. I checked the security feed. It was Derek. I opened the door, wrapping my black shawl tighter around myself, feigning the trembling weakness he expected from a grieving widow. He held a plastic container of chicken soup, his face arranged in a practiced mask of concern. "I just wanted to check on you." "Ilara," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "I know you are having trouble sleeping. I brought some soup and the sedative Dr. Thorne prescribed. You need to sleep to keep your strength up." He walked past me, his eyes scanning the hallway, lingering on the closed door of Arthur's study. He was not here to comfort me. He was here to see if I had found anything and to ensure I was too drugged to look. "Thank you, Derek," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "You are too good to me." I took the pill he offered and the glass of water. Under his watchful gaze, I placed the pill on my tongue and drank. I swallowed the water, but I slid the pill into the pocket of my cheek, a trick I had seen in movies but never thought I would have to perform in real life. I slumped my shoulders, letting my eyelids droop heavy. "I think the medicine is kicking in already." I mumbled. "Good," he said, guiding me toward the stairs with a firm hand on my back. "Go to bed. Ilara, I will lock up down here. I might just tidy up the study a bit while I am here. It is too painful for you to see his mess right now." I went upstairs, waited for the heavy thud of the front door closing 20 minutes later, and then spat the dissolving pill into the bathroom sink. I washed my bitter mouth out with cold water and went straight back down to the library. Derek had tossed the room. Books were slightly askew, papers were shuffled. But he did not know this house like I did. I walked to the fireplace. I had designed the chimney breast to be extra wide to accommodate the ventilation system, but Arthur had modified the construction drawings at the last minute without telling me why. At the time, I thought he was just being difficult. Now, I realized he was building a safe. I knelt before the hearth. The stonework was slate. I ran my fingers along the third stone from the bottom on the left side. It was slightly cooler than the rest. I pressed the corner, not inward, but sliding it laterally. It clicked. A panel popped open, revealing a steel box. My hands shook as I pulled it out. Inside was a leather-bound journal. It was not a diary of feelings. It was a ledger of crimes. I flipped through the pages, my heart pounding against my ribs. There were dates, bank account numbers in the Cayman Islands, and detailed transcripts of meetings where Derek had agreed to sell Novatech to a foreign competitor for pennies on the dollar in exchange for a massive personal payout. He had been skimming company funds for 5 years. On the last page, the handwriting was shaky, as if written by a man whose nervous system was failing him. "Alara," it read, "if you are reading this, I am gone. Do not trust anyone, especially not Derek. He is a predator. You must become a wolf in sheep's clothing. Burn him down." I looked up at the portrait of Arthur hanging above the mantel. The grief that had paralyzed me was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I closed the book and stood up. Derek wanted the company. He wanted the prestige. He wanted the chairman's seat. I would let him think he had won it. And then, when he was sitting at the very top, I would kick the chair out from under him. The next morning, I dialed Derek's number with a hand that was steady, though I forced my voice to tremble. I waited until exactly 9 o'clock, the time he always started his first cup of coffee. When he answered, I apologized profusely for the chaos at the funeral. I told him that the grief was clouding my judgment and that he was right. I told him I was not cut out for the cutthroat world of corporate leadership. I told him I wanted to sign the papers. I could practically hear the smile spreading across his face through the receiver. He was gracious, of course, but the triumph in his tone was unmistakable. He proposed a grand solution. He wanted to organize a gala at the end of the week, a black tie event he called Arthur's Legacy. It would be the official announcement of his succession as CEO, framed as a tribute to his fallen friend. It was perfect for him. It legitimized his coup in front of the entire board and the press. I agreed to everything, but I added one small, non-negotiable condition. I told him I wanted to curate the memorial segment personally. I wanted to give a speech and show a video montage of Arthur's life that I would edit myself. Derek did not hesitate for a second. In his mind, I was just a sentimental, weeping widow who wanted to show pictures of family vacations and golden retrievers. He viewed my request as harmless emotional fluff that would only serve to humanize the transition. He had no idea that I was not preparing a eulogy. I was preparing an indictment. Once I hung up, the performance ended. I drove to a quiet industrial park to meet an old university friend named Marcus, who now ran a private digital forensics and toxicology lab. I handed him the bottle of heart medication I had retrieved from the back of Arthur's bathroom cabinet. It was the only bottle Derek's team had missed during their sweep. Marcus called me 3 hours later. The results were chilling. The pills were not the standard beta blockers prescribed for Arthur's condition. They had been swapped for a compound derived from foxglove, designed to induce gradual, undetected heart failure. It was a chemical assassination, subtle enough to pass as natural causes to an unsuspecting coroner, but obvious to anyone looking for poison. Armed with this scientific confirmation, I met Isabella again. We sat in her small apartment, the shades drawn tight against the afternoon sun. She was packing a bag, ready to run. I took her hands and told her to stop running. I told her that running would only make her look guilty, and eventually, Derek would find her. I promised her the best legal defense money could buy and full immunity if she cooperated. I needed her to be more than a victim. I needed her to be the bait. We devised a plan to corner Derek. The diary and the toxicology report were strong, but good lawyers could argue them away. They could claim the diary was the paranoid rambling of a sick man or that the pills were a pharmacy error. To bury Derek Sterling, we needed him to say the words. We needed a confession. We agreed that I would gain access to his office under the guise of clearing out Arthur's personal effects. Once inside, I would plant the surveillance. Then, Isabella would play her part. She would contact him, threatening to go to the police if he did not pay her more money. It would force him to panic, to vent, and hopefully, to admit exactly what he had done while the cameras were rolling. The hunter was about to become the hunted, and he would never see the trap until it snapped shut around his ankle. Walking into the headquarters of Novatech felt like stepping into the belly of a sleeping beast. I clutched a cardboard box to my chest, the universal symbol of departure and defeat. To the receptionist and the security guards, I was the grieving widow coming to collect the last remnants of her husband. They offered me pitying smiles and held doors open, completely unaware that the woman shuffling past them in oversized sunglasses was carrying military-grade surveillance equipment in her purse. The elevator doors chimed and slid open on the executive floor, and my heart hammered against my ribs as I found myself face to chest with Derek. He was adjusting his tie, looking every inch the king of the castle. He stopped when he saw me, his expression shifting instantly from arrogance to performed concern. "Alara," he said, his voice dripping with synthetic honey. "You should not be here. I could have had my assistant pack Arthur's things for you. I need to do this myself." "Derek," I whispered, keeping my head down. "It is my way of saying goodbye." He nodded solemnly, but then his eyes narrowed slightly. And that woman, the crazy one from the funeral, I took a shaky breath, summoning every ounce of acting ability I possessed. I told him I had chased her away. I told him she was just a liar looking for a payout and that I never wanted to see her again. The tension in Derek's shoulders evaporated. He believed me. He patted my arm, told me to take all the time I needed, and stepped into the elevator. As the doors closed, isolating me in the hallway, I moved. I walked straight to Arthur's old office, which Derek had already begun to annex. I closed the heavy glass door and locked it. My hands were trembling, not from grief, but from adrenaline. I went straight to the wall panel that controlled the room's localized security. Arthur had written an override code in the margins of his diary, a backdoor he had built for emergencies. I punched in the sequence. The red light on the ceiling camera blinked once and went dark. I had exactly 5 minutes before the system would reboot and flag the anomaly. I worked with surgical precision. I pulled the micro camera from my purse. It was smaller than a dime. I moved to the bookshelf where Arthur kept his industry awards. I chose the heavy crystal statue for Innovator of the Year, the one with the jagged, abstract edges. I wedged the camera into a crevice of the crystal, angling it perfectly so it had a direct line of sight to the mahogany desk and the hidden wall safe behind it. 3 minutes left. I sat at the desk and woke up the computer. It was password protected, but I had Arthur's master key. I plugged in a data extraction tool Marcus had given me, designed to siphon metadata from the internal server. The progress bar crawled forward agonizingly slowly. 90%! 95%! Suddenly, the door handle rattled. I yanked the drive out just as the door swung open. It was Derek's executive assistant, a sharp-eyed woman named Sarah. She froze when she saw me sitting in the chair. "Mrs. Vance," she said, her voice suspicious. "I thought you were packing books." I stood up slowly, clutching a framed photograph of Arthur and me taken in Paris. I held it close to my chest, letting my eyes fill with tears. I said, my voice breaking. I just wanted to sit in his chair one last time. I found this photo. I think I am ready to go now. Her suspicion melted into awkward discomfort. She nodded and held the door open for me. I placed the photo in my box, along with a few random books, and walked out. I did not breathe until I was out of the building and standing on the sidewalk. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting a call from Marcus. Instead, it was a text message from a blocked number. "I know what you are doing. Stop now, or you will be meeting Arthur sooner than you think." A cold chill swept over me, but it was not fear. It was satisfaction. Derek was watching, and he was terrified. He was lashing out because he sensed the walls closing in. I did not reply to the threat. I opened my encrypted messaging app and typed a single line to Isabella. "Plan B starts now." The paranoia in the air was palpable, thick enough to taste. Derek did not trust my sudden submission. He had placed a black sedan at the end of my driveway, manned by 2 men who looked like they chewed glass for breakfast. Worse, I noticed the subtle glitches in my smart home system. the thermostat adjusting itself, the lights flickering in patterns that were not random. He had hacked my security system. He was watching me inside my own sanctuary. I decided to give him a show that would bore him into complacency. I played a game of cat and mouse, but I made sure the mouse looked incredibly dull. I drove to a florist and spent 45 minutes debating the merits of hydrangeas versus peonies. I went to a day spa and sat in a mud bath for 2 hours while his hired goons waited in the parking lot. I wanted them to report back that Alara Vance was nothing more than a wealthy, idle woman trying to fill the void of her grief with trivialities. While I distracted his muscle, Derek was losing his mind. I watched the feed from the hidden camera on my laptop in the safety of a coffee shop bathroom. Derek was pacing his office like a caged tiger. He had arranged a meet with Isabella, intending to silence her permanently, but she was safely tucked away in a safe house 3 towns over. When the time for the meeting came and went, Derek snapped, "On my screen." I watched him sweep an entire row of books off the shelf. He picked up a heavy crystal decanter and hurled it against the wall, shattering it into 1,000 pieces. It was a violent, unhinged display, and I recorded every second of it. Then came the call I had been praying for. He snatched up his desk phone, bypassing the secure line in his panic. "Thorne!" he barked, his voice distorted but audible through the bug. "Burn the files. The hard copies, the digital backups, everything on Arthur Vance. Do not fail me on this." I saved the recording. We had him on conspiracy to destroy evidence, but I wanted more. When I returned home that evening, there was a package on my doorstep. It was wrapped in plain brown paper with no return address. I carried it into the kitchen and cut the tape. Inside lay a porcelain doll, one that looked vaguely like me with dark hair and blue eyes. Its head had been severed and placed neatly between its feet. There was no note. The message was clear: "Stop digging, or you are next." Fear tried to claw its way up my throat, but I swallowed it down. This was not a threat of strength. It was a scream of desperation. Derek was terrified. I grabbed my coat and drove straight to the Central Police Precinct. I did not go inside to file a report. I simply stood on the front steps for 10 minutes, making sure the men in the black sedan saw me. I wanted Derek to think I was on the verge of handing everything over. I wanted to force him to rush his timeline. It worked. By the time I got home, the news broke that the Arthur's Legacy Gala had been moved up to tomorrow night. Derek was trying to seize the crown before the ground collapsed beneath him. That night, I sat before my vanity mirror. The woman looking back at me seemed frail, her eyes red-rimmed and tired. I picked up the silver shears I used for trimming fabric. I took a deep breath and grabbed a handful of my long, dark hair. The blades made a sharp, decisive sound as they cut through the silk. Strands of hair fell to the floor like dead leaves. I cut it all off, leaving a sharp, angular bob that framed my jawline like armor. I applied crimson lipstick, dark and precise. The grieving widow was gone. The woman in the mirror was a predator, and tomorrow she would eat. The event hall at Novatech was a cavernous space of glass and steel, designed to intimidate as much as it was to impress. By 6 o'clock in the evening, it was packed to capacity. Every major shareholder, every hungry journalist, and every high-ranking partner in the city was there. They were buzzing with anticipation, speculating on the future of the company and the rise of its new king. Derek Sterling moved through the crowd like a shark in a tank of minnows. He looked impeccable in a navy bespoke suit, his smile practiced and blinding. He radiated the confidence of a man who believed he had successfully stolen an empire and gotten away with murder. To him, tonight was not a memorial. It was a coronation. I made them wait. I arrived 20 minutes late, timing my entrance for maximum impact. When the double doors swung open, the murmurs in the room died instantly. I was not wearing the black, shapeless mourning weeds they expected. I was wearing a tailored white suit, sharp and blindingly bright under the halogen lights. It was a statement of war. I walked through the center aisle not with the shuffle of a broken widow, but with the stride of an architect inspecting her foundation. I could feel the eyes of the room tracking me, confused and captivated. Derek intercepted me near the stage and steered me quickly into the private VIP waiting room. The moment the door clicked shut, his smile vanished. He looked me up and down, his eyes narrowing at my choice of attire, but he did not have time to argue. "You are late. Ilara," he snapped, grabbing a stack of papers from the table. "Here is your speech. I took the liberty of revising it. Stick to the script. Read it word for word. Do not improvise. We need to project stability." He handed me a crystal glass of water. "Drink this," he commanded, his voice softening into that fake, cloying concern. "You look parched. It will help steady your nerves." I took the glass. I took the papers. I nodded obediently. "Of course. Derek," I said, "I will do exactly what needs to be done." He turned his back to me to check his reflection in the mirror one last time, adjusting his cufflinks. In that split second, I poured the water into the soil of a large potted fern standing in the corner. I would never consume anything that man gave me ever again. When he turned back, the glass was empty in my hand. I looked at him, and for a fleeting moment, I let the mask slip. I looked at him with absolute, freezing clarity. He paused, frowning slightly, sensing a shift in the air, but his ego dismissed it. He checked his watch. "It is time," he said. While we were backstage, the invisible gears of my trap were locking into place. Up in the control booth, a sound technician I had hired, a man who owed Marcus a significant favor, was making a critical adjustment. He accessed the presentation server and swapped the file labeled Memorial Tribute for a file I had given him that morning. The file names were identical, but the contents were worlds apart. Down on the floor, amidst the sea of reporters, a woman in a blonde wig and thick-rimmed glasses sat quietly in the third row. Isabella kept her head down, clutching her purse, but she was not hiding anymore. She was waiting. She was the bullet I was about to fire. And beyond the glass walls of the lobby, invisible to the guests inside, the parking lot was filling up with unmarked vehicles. I had sent the decrypted journal and the toxicology report to the head of the Economic Crimes Unit and the Homicide Division 2 hours ago. They were already in position, guarding every exit. They were not there to stop the event. They were there to watch the show, waiting for my signal to close the net. The stage was set. The players were in position. The storm was about to break. Derek stood at the podium, bathed in the golden glow of the stage lights, looking every inch the corporate savior he claimed to be. He spoke with a practiced cadence, his voice thick with manufactured emotion as he told the audience about the sacred bond of brotherhood he shared with Arthur. He painted a picture of a future where Novatech would soar to new heights under his guidance, a vision he claimed Arthur had blessed on his deathbed. It was a lie so audacious that I felt a physical wave of nausea, but the audience was captivated. They nodded in solemn agreement, completely under his spell. Then, he turned his gaze toward me. He extended a hand, his expression softening into that condescending mask of protective pity. He invited me to join him on stage, introducing me as a brave woman who had endured unspeakable loss, a fragile creature who needed the shelter of the company to survive. He was framing me as a figurehead, a symbol to be pitied and then pushed aside. I walked up the stairs, my white suit catching the light. The click of my heels on the stage floor echoed through the silence. I took the microphone from his hand. He gestured to the teleprompter where his prepared words were scrolling, waiting for me to abdicate my power. I looked at the screen. Then I looked at him. And finally, I looked directly into the lens of the live stream camera that was broadcasting to millions of viewers. My husband did not leave this company to a murderer. The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. For a heartbeat, there was total silence. Derek looked at me, his smile faltering, a flicker of confusion crossing his face as if he had misheard. Then the massive LED screen behind us went black. A second later, it roared back to life, but the commemorative logo of Novatech was gone. In its place was high-definition footage of Derek's office. It was the recording from the hidden camera I had planted in the award statue. The image was crisp. Derek was standing at his desk, carefully mixing a white powder into a bottle of Arthur's heart medication. The audio, captured by the bug, boomed through the auditorium speakers. His voice was unmistakable, filled with malice as he muttered that Arthur was too stubborn to die and needed to be removed before the merger. A collective gasp swept through the hall, a sound like all the air being sucked out of the room at once. Derek spun around, his eyes widening in horror as he watched himself commit the crime on a screen 40 feet wide. The blood drained from his face, leaving him gray and corpse-like. "Turn it off," he screamed, his voice cracking. "Turn it off right now. It is a fake. It is AI generated. Cut the feed." He lunged toward the control desk at the side of the stage, waving his arms frantically, but the video did not stop. It cut abruptly to a new scene. This time, it was Dr. Thorne, sitting in an interrogation room, his face sweaty and pale. The audio was clear as he admitted to falsifying Arthur's medical records and listing the cause of death as cardiac arrest under direct orders from Derek Sterling. The crowd erupted. Chairs scraped against the floor as people stood up in shock. Cameras flashed in a blinding strobe. Derek froze. He realized the narrative he had built for 10 years had incinerated in 60 seconds. He turned back to me, and the fear in his eyes was replaced by a feral, cornered rage. He roared and charged at me across the stage, his hands curled into claws, intent on violence. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I stood perfectly still, watching him come with a gaze of absolute contempt. I was not afraid of him anymore. He was not a monster. He was just a desperate man whose world was ending. Before he could reach me, a voice cut through the chaos from the audience. "It is all true." Isabella stood up in the third row. She ripped off her blonde wig and threw her glasses to the ground. She stood tall in her red dress, a beacon of defiance amidst the sea of dark suits. She shouted over the noise, identifying herself and declaring that she was the weapon Derek had tried to use, and that she would no longer be silent. The entire room turned to look at her, and in that moment, Derek stopped. He looked from me to Isabella, and he knew, with terrifying certainty, that he was already dead. The reaction was instantaneous. Before Derek could close the 3 feet of distance between us, the side doors burst open with a violence that matched the storm outside. A swarm of uniformed officers and plainclothes detectives flooded the auditorium. They moved like a tide, intercepting Derek and slamming him onto the polished hardwood stage. The sound of his expensive suit tearing and the metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the stunned silence of the room. He was pinned down, his face pressed against the floorboards, right at my feet. He was screaming. He shrieked that the video was a fabrication, a deep fake created by artificial intelligence, a conspiracy designed to frame an innocent man. But nobody was listening. The truth had a weight that his lies could no longer support. As he struggled, phones throughout the audience began to chime with breaking news alerts. The live stream had cut to a split screen, showing Dr. Thorne being led out of his penthouse in handcuffs, his head covered by a jacket, live on the evening news. The conspiracy was being dismantled in real time, visible to the entire world. I stood over him, unshaken. I adjusted the microphone stand and addressed the room, my voice steady and echoing off the rafters. I told the shareholders and the press that effective immediately, I was assuming interim control of Novatech. I announced a complete internal audit and a purge of the executive board that had enabled Derek's corruption. I did not ask for their permission. I stated it as a fact. The room, usually filled with skepticism and questions, remained silent. They were witnessing a transfer of power that was absolute. The flashbulbs erupted like a lightning storm. The narrative was irresistible to the press. They were witnessing a story they had never seen before. It was not the wife versus the mistress. It was the wife and the mistress standing together to take down the king. Isabella stood in the aisle, head held high, as reporters swarmed her, not with judgment, but with awe. She had walked into the lion's den and come out holding the keys. As the officers hauled Derek to his feet, the fight drained out of him. He looked at me, and the rage in his eyes dissolved into a pathetic, terrified pleading. He called my name, begging me to stop this, to remember our history, to think about the company. I did not say a word. I simply turned my back on him. I looked up at the massive screen, where the video of his crime had been replaced by the original memorial photo of Arthur. That was the only man who deserved my attention. The financial analysts in the back of the room were already shouting into their phones. The stock had dipped for a moment during the chaos, but as I spoke, as I demonstrated a strength that Derek never possessed, the numbers began to climb. The market loves certainty, and I was giving them ironclad resolve. By the time I stepped off the stage, Novatech shares were trading higher than they had in 6 months. The public did not see a scandal. They saw a leader who had cleansed the rot from the foundation. I walked down the stairs and through the parting crowd straight to Isabella. She was trembling slightly now that the adrenaline was fading. I did not shake her hand. I pulled her into a tight embrace. We were two women from opposite sides of a war who had realized the real enemy was the general. We had saved each other, and in doing so, we had balanced the scales for the dead. It has been exactly 30 days since the storm broke, and the office on the 45th floor looks nothing like the mausoleum Arthur left behind. I had the heavy mahogany paneling torn out and replaced with white oak and floor-to-ceiling glass. The sunlight now floods the room from every angle, leaving no dark corners for secrets to hide. It is a space designed for transparency, a physical manifestation of the promise I made to the shareholders and to myself. Justice, when it finally arrived, was swift and absolute. The trial was the most watched legal event in the state, but it was short. The evidence was simply too overwhelming for any defense attorney to dismantle. Derek Sterling and Dr. Thorne were both sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for conspiracy to commit murder and grand larceny. When the gavel fell, Derek did not look back at me. He stared at the table, a man who had gambled his soul for a golden chair and ended up in a concrete box. Isabella did not stay for the verdict. She did not need to see him in chains to find her closure. She took the substantial reward money granted to her for her role as a whistleblower and moved 2 states away. She sent me a letter last week with a photograph of a small, charming storefront filled with hydrangeas and roses. She used the money to open a flower shop, just as she had always dreamed. She is building the life Arthur had urged her to find, a life defined by beauty rather than desperation. Yesterday, while archiving the last of the digital evidence, I found one final file on the USB drive that I had been too afraid to open. It was labeled simply for Alara. I locked the office door and pressed play. On the screen, Arthur appeared. He looked tired, his skin pale from the poison that was slowly killing him, but his eyes were bright and clear. He spoke to me with a calmness that broke my heart. He said he knew he would not survive to see the spring. He said he knew Derek would make his move soon. But then he smiled, a genuine, warm smile that I had missed more than I could say. He said he was not afraid because he knew exactly who I was. He said he knew that beneath my gentleness lay a brilliant, fierce intellect that would not only survive the fire but would burn down anyone who tried to hurt our family. He trusted me to protect what we built, not as his widow, but as his equal. I stood up and walked to the massive window overlooking the city skyline. The cars below looked like toys, moving in steady, predictable streams. I realized that the crushing weight of loneliness and fear that had suffocated me at the funeral was gone. I was alone in this office, but I was not lonely. I had shed the skin of the victim. I had followed Arthur's advice. I had become the wolf, not to hunt for sport, but to protect the pack. I returned to my desk and picked up the fountain pen Arthur had given me for our 5th anniversary. I signed the final documents establishing the Arthur Vance Foundation. It is a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing legal and financial aid to victims of corporate fraud and workplace violence. It ensures that no one else will ever have to fight a monster like Derek Sterling alone. I reached up to my neck and unclasped the gold chain I had worn since the funeral. I slid my wedding ring off the metal links. For a month, I had worn it near my heart as a symbol of loss. Now, I slid it back onto my finger. It was no longer a shackle to the past. It was a badge of honor. I looked at the ring, then out toward the horizon where the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold. I am ready for whatever comes next. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please leave a comment down below and share your thoughts. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel Lily Revenge Stories, hit the like button, and press the hype button to help this video reach more people.